Hi everyone, excited to be here. Thanks to all of you who submitted questions. We have lots of great ground to cover today, and I'm going to get through as many answers as I can within the hour. Let's get into clarity first, since I know it's on a lot of your minds.
Is Flexa or AMP waiting for the Clarity Act to be passed before there will be any major announcements?
This may come as a surprise, but no, Flexa isn't waiting for clarity. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if some of our customers are. Let me take this opportunity to provide some more background and re-emphasize some points I've made many times in the past. Announcements for enterprise companies typically come after three things are already in place: internal approval, live transactions, and confidence that the program can scale without friction. Regulation is one input into that, but it's one of several. In many cases, partners prefer to operate quietly at first, testing flows, validating economics, and integrating with existing systems before making anything public. That's especially true in payments, where reliability and user experience matter more than headlines. Clarity will help, because it provides confidence, reduces friction, and simplifies how these programs are evaluated internally. But you shouldn't expect a single trigger event where announcements suddenly appear. What you'll see instead is a series of activations that reflect work that's already been underway. The better way to think about it is that announcements follow maturity. The good news is that at Flexa, a lot of that maturation is already happening.
Without specific names, how many companies have and will adopt Flexa once Clarity is passed?
Again, I'd frame it slightly differently. Adoption isn't gated by a single moment like the passage of Clarity. Legislation helps, particularly around classification and compliance, but enterprise integration depends on a broader set of factors, including internal approvals, treasury policies, accounting treatment, and technical deployment. Those processes take time, regardless of regulatory progress. What I can say is that this is not a question of if, or even how many, in a speculative sense. We already have meaningful scale in the pipeline. Flexa is already integrated with payment service providers, and we're working on more, that collectively support tens of thousands of enterprise merchants globally, and we have another 1,000 plus small and medium-sized merchants that are configured or in process and waiting to launch. I will say that I really don't think we, here on Discord X, are fully appreciating the scale and effort involved in an enterprise payments integration. Not only are payment integrations incredibly sensitive, i.e., you take payments offline for even a minute and the entire lifeblood of a company just stops, but they're intricate and highly regulated. We're talking a space where multi-year sales cycles and tens of months for integrations is not just common, but often the best-case scenario. As clarity improves, both legislatively and operationally, you should expect that pipeline to convert progressively, assuming the world exits its current tailspin. But it will happen in phases, not all at once, as merchants move from enablement to active deployment and then to public announcement. The important point is that the infrastructure is in place and the demand is there. What you're seeing now is the timing of activation.
Upneat's recent post, Link framed the March 17th SEC interpretation as a real inflection point, but it's interpretive guidance, not statute, reversible by a future SEC. Since March 17th, has the interpretation actually moved merchant conversations forward? Or are enterprise legal teams still holding pilots and contracts until the Clarity Act passes? And if Clarity stalls past May, does the interpretation alone carry enough weight to sustain the 2026 pipeline?
Great questions. First, at a high level, Clarity is about market structure. It is intended to define when a digital asset is not a security, and to draw clearer jurisdictional lines between the SEC and CFTC. That matters because today, the lack of clear classification is one of the primary barriers to achieving real scale in the US. That said, clarity on its own is not sufficient, although it has no doubt driven additional merchant interest and made communications more productive. As I've noted before, meaningful crypto adoption ultimately depends on three legislative components: stablecoin legislation, Genius, market structure, clarity, and tax reform, particularly a de minimis exemption for everyday payments, so buying a cup of coffee, for example, is not a taxable event. We have made meaningful progress, especially with Genius, and also with the recent SEC interpretive guidance, but stablecoin legislation and SEC guidance is not enough for real adoption. Until all three of these frameworks are codified, there will continue to be uncertainty for builders, merchants, and users. I believe we will get all three. The direction is clear. It is just taking longer than most expected.
I am a heavy online shopper and wanted to know if we are waiting on the Clarity Act regulation for merchants to open online access. If not regulation, then what needs to happen for merchants integrated with Flexa to open up online shopping?
We're working through a number of e-commerce online integrations now. In fact, I think there's a question we'll get to later from the owner of a business that's recently integrated. I'm convinced that what the team has built in Flexa Checkout is without a doubt the best UX for crypto payments available anywhere on Earth. That said, Flexa has historically focused on in-person integrations because they were the harder problem to solve. We knew that if we did in-person well, we could support online easily. That's starting to play out, and I'm confident that more and more merchants will transition to a Flexa-powered online offering over time. For instance, Coinbase Commerce just shut down, and Coinbase Business is hardly a viable replacement for merchants who want to accept more than USDC/USDT. At Flexa, we don't care about being first, we care about being the best. So I think we can expect more online payments integrations, and you'll be the first to hear about them.
Sir, we keep hearing there are big-name companies waiting to onboard with Flexa. I believe your words, you know them. My question to you is, when will these potential contracts be public knowledge? Is clarity the catalyst that companies are waiting for? I'm still holding on, and I will until you crash or flourish, but it's a question many of us have.
Thank you. Another solid question here. So yes, you do know them, and they are large, well-known companies. The primary gating issue is not demand, as I've said before, it's readiness to launch publicly. That readiness depends on a number of factors, including internal approvals, contractual constraints, macro conditions, and the pace of broader crypto adoption. Regulation is part of that, but it's not the only factor. Legislation like Clarity helps by reducing classification risk and giving enterprises more confidence. But in practice, large merchants also need alignment across legal, finance, treasury, and risk before they're willing to go live in a visible way. As for timing, we will announce partners as soon as they authorize us to do so. But until then, we are legally obligated not to disclose them, and maintaining that trust is critical to our business. I will add that real activity is already happening. For example, last week, Flexa processed the largest single transaction in our history, close to $1 million, fully collateralized and approved in less than a second, for a well-known merchant that has not yet approved any public disclosure. That's the kind of adoption that typically precedes formal announcements.
How many big, well-known merchants have actually committed to going live after Clarity Act passes? From the top 10 merchants that is always talked about, what is a conservative amount of volume to be expected from them in crypto/stablecoin payments to be processing through Flexa? Are these merchants also committing to funding their own liquidity pools in doing so? If not any or all, is it most or 50%? I would also just like to say thank you and the Flexa team for all that you have done and are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll try to address this while staying consistent with what I've already shared. On commitments, I've touched on this in a few of the prior answers. But large merchants generally do not structure things as, we will go live when X law passes. It's a progression. Evaluation, integration, pilot, and then scaled deployment. Regulation, including Clarity, helps accelerate that process, but it's not typically a binary trigger tied to a specific commitment. Make sense? On the top merchants and expected volume, it's important to be careful here. We don't provide forward-looking volume projections or break out expectations by specific partners. What I can say is that when enterprise merchants enable a new payment method, adoption tends to build over time, starting relatively modestly, and then scaling as awareness, UX, and incentives improve. Stepping back, I know there's a desire for precise numbers and timelines. I see these requests and a few other questions here. But the reality is that enterprise adoption doesn't happen all at once or on a fixed schedule. What I've tried to convey is that the infrastructure is in place, the pipeline is real, and as conditions improve, you should expect that to convert into visible activity over time.
Is AMP collateralizing a meaningful amount of transactions in parts of the world where crypto regulation has already been set, such as the EU or parts of Asia? If not, what's the main holdback? Second question, how soon after the Clarity Act is signed into law do you expect to see significant usage of the payments network? Or does that not require this bill to pass?
Good questions. On your first point, today, Flexa has not yet begun processing payments at scale in the EU or Asia. That is a function of rollout sequencing, not lack of opportunity. Payments is a local business, and a regulated industry. And entering a new geography requires alignment across merchant integrations, PSP relationships, licensing, and consumer readiness. As many of you know, we are authorized to operate in jurisdictions like El Salvador and Canada, and we expect to announce additional international markets this year. But the truth is, our focus has been on building the right foundation before expanding more broadly, and it's hard to slap a definitive timeline on this. Our competitors who do so are either skipping regulatory requirements or offering a lesser product to merchants, notably, none of which are enterprise. On your second question, Flexa does not require clarity to be law in order to operate, and activity is of course already happening in the United States. What legislation does is reduce friction, particularly for large U.S. enterprises, and make it easier for them to move from limited deployments to broader rollouts. And in terms of timing, once there is clear statutory guidance, you should expect increased momentum over the following quarters, not an immediate step change. As I've said before, and it deserves repeating, payments adoption typically scales progressively as integrations expand and usage builds. So the right framing is that international expansion and overall usage are already in motion. Clarity should accelerate scale and visibility, but it is not a prerequisite for progress.
Are Flexa and its partners waiting on the Clarity Act to pass to make announcements, or are there other reasons it has been quiet regarding partnerships?
Bit of a broken record here, but I want to address the other reasons aspect of this question. Firstly, it is not a matter of Flexa or its partners waiting on Clarity to make announcements. To be candid, I think this is simply an X rumor that snowballed. We decidedly do not police rumors on X, but I'm glad to correct the record now. Legislation helps, but again, our announcements are always driven by partner readiness, not a single regulatory event. For large enterprises, that means alignment across legal, finance, treasury, and operations, along with confidence that a program can scale reliably before it is made public. That said, there's no doubt the regulatory environment over the past several years has had a real impact on how openly and aggressively we have been able to operate. The 2022 SEC v. Wahi case, during the Gensler era, with its flat-out false allegations about Flexa and AMP, created a level of uncertainty around parts of the ecosystem, specifically AMP, that nearly ruined us. And all this even though Flexa was not a party to that case. Moreover, there have been similar, copycat state-level actions that have also caused damage, and a currently ongoing investigation that has had us building with one arm tied behind our backs since 2024. Massively frustrating, to say the least. So yeah, as a practical matter, that environment has required us to be more measured in how we communicate and market certain aspects of the network, especially AMP. Again, and importantly, that has not stopped progress. Partnerships, integrations, and transaction activity have continued to develop. But in many cases, partners prefer to move deliberately and control the timing of any public announcement. As regulatory clarity improves, including through legislation like Clarity, you should expect the pace of public announcements to increase. But it will reflect work that has already been underway, rather than a single moment where everything suddenly becomes visible.
Has the current regulatory environment affected announcements and partnerships with major companies? We've heard a lot of exciting upcoming announcements and working behind the scenes to partner with major Fortune 500 companies, yet haven't seen anything new other than deals over the past few years. There was even the hint of the major coffee company that suddenly went cold. If regulatory conditions have led to delays, are there agreements in place with these potential partners and a plan to move forward once regulation is in place, or is it primarily theoreticals at this time? If we are waiting on Clarity and it passes, how long afterwards should we expect to wait after it passes for these types of updates?
I will hit this question again since I think is important. Yes, the regulatory environment over the past several years has absolutely affected both the pace and visibility of partnerships. For large enterprises, uncertainty around asset classification, accounting treatment, and compliance creates real friction, not just for legal teams, but across finance, treasury, and risk. That slows launches and, just as importantly, delays when companies are comfortable going public. And again, the 2022 SEC v. Wahi matter created a meaningful overhang for parts of the industry, including us, even though we were not a party to the case. The practical effect at that time was abandonment and hesitation from partners, terminations and disruptions in planned integrations, and AMP delistings by third parties reacting to regulatory uncertainty. The copycat state-level actions and the ongoing state-level investigation we've been dealing with for about 3 years now have also made building, launching, and announcing anything extremely difficult, to say the least. That said, we have plenty of active relationships, integrations, and contractual agreements. What you're seeing publicly tends to lag what is already happening operationally because merchants move deliberately and control when and how they go public. And again, the 2022 SEC v. Wahi matter created a meaningful overhang for parts of the industry, including us, even though we were not a party to the case. But it won't flip a switch overnight. In practice, once there is clear statutory guidance, you should expect a measured rollout over the following quarters, not days or weeks, as companies move from pilot to broader deployment and then to public announcement. The key point is that progress has continued despite the environment. As conditions improve, the gap between what's happening behind the scenes and what's visible publicly.
Hi, Danny. If you had to boil it down, what would you say are the key attributes of businesses that align well with Flex's solutions?
Great question. At a high level, the businesses that align best with Flexa are those operating at meaningful transaction scale, where reducing fraud, chargebacks, and payment costs materially impacts the bottom line. These merchants tend to place a premium on settlement finality, particularly in categories where chargebacks are persistent, and increasingly prioritize customer experience and optionality. That includes enabling consumers to pay with any digital asset, on any chain, using any wallet, without introducing additional operational complexity. I should add, they also share a willingness to adopt modern payment infrastructure. That's an area where Flexa has been especially effective, delivering new capabilities without requiring merchants to rethink how they operate. In practice, the strongest fit is a merchant looking for lower costs, zero fraud, and greater payment flexibility, all delivered in a seamless, enterprise-grade way.
Does Flexa have a clear roadmap with the current and future developments? If so, please explain what is it.
We do have a clear roadmap, but much of it is tied to partner work and isn't something we can share in detail publicly. At a high level, we're focused on expanding integrations, scaling the network, and advancing new capabilities like agentic commerce, which Trev is running with full steam ahead.
What specific milestones have been and will be achieved to improve adoption of the Flexa payment network?
Honestly, I would think about milestones in terms of progress across a few key areas rather than any single event. For example, we've continued to build out the regulatory and licensing foundation required to operate at enterprise scale, something none of our competitors have come close to achieving. We've expanded integrations with merchants and payment service providers, which is what ultimately drives distribution. And we've advanced the underlying platform so it can support more assets, wallets, and real-world payment flows.
1. How many full-time employees does Flexa have? 2. Can you provide a detailed roadmap for next 18 months? 3. Are issued token vesting tied to performance such as transaction volume? 4. Please reconcile the last 50B of issued tokens between third-party merchants, third-party partners, Flexa, Anvil AMP team, and tokens issued but expected to be issued to third parties.
I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to answer that level of detail in this forum. Headcount, detailed 18-month roadmap items, token vesting terms, and token allocation breakdowns involve confidential company, partner, personnel, and treasury matters. Some of those topics may also implicate legal, contractual, or regulatory restrictions. What I can say is that we remain focused on expanding integrations, scaling network usage, improving the product, and building toward broader adoption as the regulatory environment improves.
Is there an update on Soulflare wallet integration? This was announced in Fireside Chat with Trev early last year. Next question. How is expansion going into Latin America and/or EU? Next question. Are AMP tokens ever sold to fund payrolls for employees? Not that is a problem, but just wondering as there was a big amount moved from Flexa Treasury into Gemini, 2.5 billion tokens.
Great questions. Let me take those one at a time. On wallet integrations, timing ultimately depends on coordination across multiple teams and ensuring everything meets our standards for security, compliance, and user experience. It's an area of active work, and we'll share more as things are ready. On international expansion, including Latin America and the EU, the opportunity is very real, but it's something we're approaching deliberately. Each region has its own regulatory, licensing, and banking considerations, And in Europe in particular, the rollout of Mika, as noted already, is creating more clarity, which we view as a positive long-term. But again, these are not single, uniform markets in practice, so scaling requires localized integrations and strong partnerships. Our focus is on entering new regions in a way that maintains the same enterprise-grade, seamless experience merchants expect from Flexa. Finally, on AMP and Treasury activity, I'm glad you asked, because there's been some confusion there, and more than a few ridiculous claims on X. Flexa to date has been funded almost exclusively through private sales of AMP to accredited investors, not through any form of ongoing public market selling. To date, only a small portion of Flexa's original AMP treasury, on the order of something nearer to 1% than anything close to significant, has ever been sold into the public market. That's since 2018. Simply stated, in Flexa's 8-year existence, we have not relied on routine public market sales of AMP to fund payroll or day-to-day operations, and our approach to treasury management is designed to support long-term alignment with the platform.
Knowing what you know now about building Flexa, from regulatory challenges to partnerships and market cycles, what would you have done differently? Are there any strategic decisions you would approach differently today? Brian Armstrong has spoken a lot about the future of agent-to-agent payments and autonomous AI transacting value. Do you see Flexa playing a role in facilitating agent-driven payments? And if so, how might Flexa's infrastructure support that evolution? Without sharing anything confidential, what metrics or milestones should the community be paying attention to that best reflect Flexa's progress and long-term trajectory?
I don't know that we would have done anything differently. This entire journey has been a constant learning experience, and there are options we're tweaking and adjusting and exploring today that simply weren't available to us 8 years ago. Candidly, I think the work that Flexa has done in this space is one of the main reasons that crypto, and particularly stablecoin payments, have actually become a viable competitor to card rails. I've always believed that payments are the ultimate use case for crypto payments, but I also believe that adoption is going to happen behind the scenes. As for the foundation we've built and how it can accommodate future developments, I think it's solid. I'm also not worried about throwing it out and starting over, but only if that's exactly what needs to happen. With the advent of AI, code itself is becoming less and less precious every day. It's process and iteration speed that matters, and I think we have that at Flexa. One thing we often say internally, with pride, is how incredibly good we've become at being meticulous in planning and immediate in execution. We're constantly looking at parts of the business that need improvement, thinking hard, often from first principles, about what needs fixing.
Is Flexa involved in agentic machine-to-machine payments in any way?
Yes, absolutely. This is an area we're actively exploring. I've believed for a while now that agentic commerce will be one of the primary drivers of crypto payments adoption. As we've said in the past, crypto payments become truly mainstream when they fade into the background and just work, and agent-driven transactions are a big part of that future. Trev, in particular, is spending a significant amount of time in this arena, working on a range of experiments and early-stage projects with various partners. It's still early, and things can change, but I do expect this to become an important part of how payments evolve, and we're excited to share more as that work matures.
With SPEDN sunsetting and Flexa refocusing on merchant B2B infrastructure, has the team explored positioning AMP's collateral manager system as a settlement guarantee layer for agentic commerce protocols like X402 or MPP? The modular partition architecture seems purpose-built for backing autonomous AI agent transactions, which is the one piece those protocols are missing. Is that on the roadmap?
Yes, there is a lot of work and thinking happening here. See above.
When do you see brand tokens and loyalty points becoming mainstream forms of payment? And what makes you most excited about how Flexa will play a part in this era of transactions? Thanks, Danny. Keep up the great work.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I'll try to make this quick because we're running low on time, but this is one of my favorite questions. We're actually engaged with a number of firms right now who are actively exploring crypto and stablecoin-powered loyalty solutions. One of the key things that you don't frequently hear Flexa saying, but if you're paying attention, you must be hearing almost everywhere else, is that stablecoins are the way that money will move in the future. This is true, but it's really only a sliver of the overall picture. The fact is that any kind of asset of value, price stable to fiat or not, will move over crypto rails in the future. The reason that most other companies are focused on stablecoins is because their systems aren't set up to support real-time exchange at the time of authorization and settlement. Collateralization, by AMP of course, is how Flexa has solved this problem. And that's why we're to this date the only crypto payments provider who can truthfully state that we are enabling payments in any asset, from any app, to any merchant, anywhere in the world. Loyalty points are of course not price stable, and no merchant wants to permanently peg their loyalty program point value to the US dollar. A lot of other things are also not price stable, which is why we have seen so many projects recently developed around real-world assets gain traction. The payments of the future are going to draw on a wallet that contains an individual or agent's entire net worth. It's critically important that we build a payment stack that can properly accommodate that.
What is stopping Flexa from rolling out in Europe?
Great question, and something I touched on already. I'll add that there's nothing fundamentally preventing Flexa from rolling out in Europe, and you'll see momentum in that area this year. It's more a matter of sequencing and doing it the right way. Payments in the EU are governed by a different regulatory and licensing framework, particularly with the introduction of MiCA, which requires a thoughtful approach to how digital asset payments are structured, settled, and integrated with local systems. At the same time, Europe is not a single uniform market in practice. Banking relationships, merchant acquiring, and consumer payment preferences still vary meaningfully by country. So scaling a platform like Flexa requires localized integration and strong on-the-ground partnerships. We're building that. So the opportunity is absolutely there, and the regulatory clarity emerging in Europe is actually a positive long-term. It just means expansion is something we approach deliberately, making sure we meet the highest compliance standards while delivering the same seamless, enterprise-grade experience merchants expect from Flexa.
Do you want to sauna at the newest Flexa-supported sauna in northern Michigan? Heart Sauna, going live in the coming days. Thank you to you and Caitlin and the whole team.
Hey there. Yes, I do. Happy that this integration is off the ground, and definitely encourage folks to spend crypto at Hearth for all of their sauna needs. Okay, everybody. I think that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciated all of the thoughtful questions, and I want to thank you for your passion and your interest in what we're doing here at Flexa. It's not something that I take for granted, and I want you to know that I am continuing to focus every day on growing this ecosystem as best I can. I hope you all have an excellent weekend, and I look forward to doing this again sometime.